If you've ever suddenly found yourself in a spot where you went, how on earth did I get here? Our guest today is going to possibly top your story. Now, not that it's about one-upmanship, but she certainly was not expecting to be in the middle of a political firestorm and heaps of media speculation just going about her job. We're going to chat with Amy Brown in just a moment here on Towards Understanding the podcast. Please like, rate, review, share it with others. Helps us get it out to more people. All right, let's chat with Amy. G'day, Amy.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have a chat to you. And for many across the country listening in Australia and also New Zealand, if you're around New South Wales, you may know of you as there's different ways and different conversations that happen in the public sphere a little while ago in the last year or two. But perhaps for those around the country are not quite as familiar as your role. Before we talk a little bit about some of the tough stuff that you've had to go through in that space, could you talk to us a bit about your journey to even getting into being a public servant?
Yeah, great question. So I was previously a finance lawyer. I started off working in kind of some of the big law firms here in town, went across to London and worked for a bank and came back. And then in the global financial crisis, government started spending money in a downturn, which meant there were a lot of government infrastructure projects happening. And I realised that working on government infrastructure, particularly for me, schools, hospitals, housing, things like that, actually that's where I found my purpose in a career sense. As a Christian, I believe that everyone has intrinsic value and equal worth, and so they all deserve equal access to government services. And the thought that as a lawyer I could play a part in making those projects happen was really kind of exciting to me. So then I joined government at the end of 2012 and basically just did a decade in the public service working on these really important infrastructure projects that hopefully a lot of the citizens of New South Wales will be able to see, feel, use and be enabled by.
Yeah. Now, you did mention there as well, as a Christian, has your Christian faith always been a part of your life from sort of growing up, or is that more as an adult part? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I remember it vividly. So when I was 9 years old, we were living in the US at the time, and my dad got given a voucher to a bookstore, as you do. He went into the bookstore. He couldn't see anything he wanted to buy. And for some reason, he felt on his heart to buy a Bible. He thought, I've never owned a Bible. I'm not from a Christian background. I don't even really know what it says. So he bought a Bible, took it home, read it. He got to Deuteronomy. There's some passages in there around choose life so that you and your children may live, about what that's like to be part of God's people and loved by God. And he became a Christian. So he then sat all four of us kids down and kind of explained as best he could the gospel. I mean, he was such a new Christian and he hadn't really even met any Christians yet. And by then we were just in the process of moving to Australia. So he kind of explained it as best he could, woke me up one Sunday morning when we just arrived and said, we're going to drive down the main road near where we were staying, and the first church we find we're going to go into. And it was a wonderful church called Christ Church Survived here in Sydney, which had amazing teaching, and, he devoured it, all of the kind of, Christianity Explored courses, read all the Gospels, and kind of we then went on the journey with him as to what it means to be a child of God. So I'm very lucky that his conversion story was kind of an intergenerational conversion story and that I got to be part of it.
Yeah, well, that's phenomenal. I absolutely love that story. And so ever since, it's just been a part of not sort of his journey, but your choice of the way you're going to live your life too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just been displayed to me again and again over the years through the faithfulness of God, despite me wondering or doubting or forgetting or, going through all those phases that you do as you're growing up as a teenager and into your 20s and 30s and early working and all the chaos. God again and again just keeps demonstrating to me that living in his house with his people and in a way that we are eternally loved through the death of Jesus, that is just a better way. And so I've known that my whole life, and now getting to raise my own kids, knowing God has been it's a privilege and a blessing, and I thank him every day.
Now, Amy, you mentioned as you first sort of talked about that career and the journey to a public servant that you were there for 10 years. My understanding was you weren't especially thinking that it would only be 10 years, that it might be longer. And I think in your own words, in an article I read recently around what happened, you said you found yourself in the middle of a political firestorm. Could you talk to us a bit about, for those who may not know what happened, what occurred and how you found yourself in that situation?
Yeah, great question. I won't get too bogged down in the details, but at a very high level, I got dragged into a really high-profile parliamentary inquiry around the appointment of a particular individual to a high-profile overseas role. And when it was announced, there was a level of public outcry and quite a bit of a media firestorm, if you will. And I went to that inquiry as a witness. Put my hand on the Bible and told the truth as best I could, which definitely took a level of courage and understanding in the importance of integrity and public accountability. I had to draw on a level of courage I never knew I had, and we can talk a bit about that. But part of sometimes courage as a leader is being able to keep moving forward even when you feel alone. Because for a lot of that inquiry, I was the sole witness in the hot seat, if you will, with hours and hours of grilling at any one time, and really complicated and contentious subject matter. The punchline of that chapter is that I ended up losing my job, which was really tough, because I think any time when you leave a job that you love, particularly not on your terms, that's something that you really need to process. And we'll talk a bit about it, but I could not have got through it without my faith.
Let's touch on a couple of those moments that you did say then around that, the need for courage in that and the aspects around it. Can you talk to us around how you did, you're showing up day in, day out, you're getting grilled, you sort of any one moment can perhaps potentially slip something up. You want to make sure you're telling the truth in all of what that is too. Take us through how you actually went about in a relatively lonely situation and being that centre of all of it, to have the courage to make sure you did deliver the things you knew you wanted to deliver.
Yeah. I mean, at a human level, I guess my advice for people in similar sort of circumstances is that preparation does prevent poor performance. So I took very seriously the calling on me to sit there in a parliamentary inquiry with it being live streamed to as many people as wanted to watch. And that if I truly believed in public accountability, I had to believe it when I was in the hot seat as well. And I genuinely think that when the decision is taken by the government that is that people are worried about, then having to sit there and explain and answer lots of questions, that's a good thing. That's, we're stewards of your taxpayer dollars. So if there is something that occurs like that, then people do need to stand there and be able to answer questions. I did have good people in my team who prepared me for a lot of that inquiry in terms of the technical documentation. I was studying every night and all weekend like I was studying for the HSC. It was so intense. My poor husband just kept bringing me toasties because that's all he knew how to do, because there's not a lot you can do to help someone. You can't learn it for them. And then I think obviously there was a much deeper level for me where part of these situations, why they're so overwhelming, is we feel out of control. And at a human level, it was looking like so much of it was out of my control. But that's where being a Christian comes in, because I would profess to say that I know the person who is in control, and that even though I didn't know what was going to happen and it all felt like an absolute turmoil, on crazy, on a tiny sailboat with tumultuous seas, actually I knew that, God was an anchor and a lighthouse and my protector and my shepherd and saviour, and I just had to cling to that, knowing that, for those who love him, he's working everything for the good in your life, and that's what I needed to cling to.
Now, this storm was around you because it involved anyone from the people in cabinet and all sorts of areas, and so this is why there was such a spotlight on you as well. As you went through it, Amy, was there a moment where, as you're giving your answers and your testimony, that you sort of realised, hey, look, I think my job might be in jeopardy here as you went through? Was that a moment that happened then, or was it only later once it all came out in the wash? How were you processing that part of it?
Yeah, I think I started off by walking through, perhaps a bit naively, saying, right, well, if I just tell the truth and answer the questions that are put before me and do my job, I'll be fine. And I guess my advice to very senior leaders that are kind of in the firing line, so to speak, because when you're head of a department, you are accountable for everything that happens in that department. You sort of need to sometimes just be a bit less naive, I suppose, and think, okay, what if the unforeseeable happened? Who am I going to call? What's my break glass in case of emergency plan? And, that can be people from outside your organisation who you trust, who are really objective and wise. It can be, a lawyer if you're going to need that sort of protection. It can be someone who can come and cook meals for your family because you don't have time. Who's your support crew that you're going to gather around you? And I think for the first, certainly, few weeks at least of what was going on, it didn't occur to me that I might need that break glass in case of emergency plan. So I just kind of kept going about my, set my alarm, wake up, pray, go into the inquiry, rinse and repeat. And it's only when I gave some evidence that kind of contradicted what had been said publicly by some important people that as soon as I walked out, I thought, no, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is big, and I might lose my job. And it's interesting what you pray in those moments, and what you pray is not necessarily what ends up happening, because God knows the bigger picture. Yeah. So I did end up losing my job. But yes, as to what followed, I'm sure we have more to talk about there too.
We do indeed. We're going to be back with Amy Brown in just a couple of moments' time, talking about having left this role because of the inquiry and all of what has occurred, and having to leave not just the CEO role of the Investment New South Wales, but the public service as a whole, something she'd really loved and desired and wanted to keep being involved in. How did then Amy process that, go through that? What did she have to hold on to? How did she go from such a key spotlight on her and cope with those next weeks and months? We're going to talk to her about that on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Amy, I want to come to that and the understanding of what it might be like. Most of us, if we leave a role, whether either we choose to or perhaps are forced out for some reason or whatever it might be, it's not public and splashed over the papers. It's not on the nightly news. It's not after a massive inquiry that is being live streamed and that has important people throughout governments in the focus. It must have been a very surreal time to actually then have to, after all of that, then leave your role as well.
Surreal is a great word for it, actually. Yeah, it's interesting. I look back on that time, and some components of it are kind of clear as crystal. How sometimes you have one moment, you think, oh gosh, that's like it was yesterday. But so much of it is like when you see those old movies and you're looking through a fuzzy lens. Because, essentially the whole thing went for kind of up to about 16 weeks, to be honest, by the time all the inquiry flowed through and the media attention and so on. And so there are whole kind of, weeks at a time where I just look back and go, I don't quite know how I got through that on a day-to-day basis. And now it just feels quite surreal and otherworldly, if you will.
Yeah. And I think then that aspect, I would imagine too, is suddenly there's this big loss. There's this big gap, right? That you feel like, okay, look, here I am a department secretary. I'm doing the right thing for the public. I'm telling the truth before, in my faith and before my God, I'm telling the truth. Here I am now out of a job. and then suddenly I would imagine the loss of actually not having that purpose, and being at the level you're at, it's not like it's a cruisy job either. There's a lot of pace going on. What was that like suddenly to be very, very no pace, and the loss of that purpose, I suppose?
Yes. I mean, it's interesting. I literally had to grieve it, I think, mainly because I loved, and I still love, the public service. I found being a public servant so fulfilling. I mean, there's that Eric Liddell saying, he says, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. For me, it's like when I worked as a bureaucrat, I felt God's pleasure because when I looked around, my state in particular, I could see things we'd done that were good. We helped get through COVID. I helped on the hospital projects and schools and early childhood. So there was so much good in it that suddenly not having that when you weren't mentally prepared for it to be gone. And then all the relationships that go with it. I mean, I had people I was very close to in the public service, they came to my birthday dinner, that type of thing, that suddenly, because of all the weirdness of what happened, and I think for some people, that kind of self-preservation, transcending courage meant that they got quite distant from the whole thing. I had to grieve the relationships as much as I did the job, if you know what I mean. There was a very kind of relational element to it that I really had to process.
I'd love to find out too, in that time, the role of family for you and the role of faith as you went through those that period of time. How did they play out for you?
Yeah, so family, I mean, as you can imagine, family were invaluable during that time. And it's hard, like I think for my parents, because a lot of people, they don't know the ins and outs and the technicalities of the public service and the Westminster system and the legislation and all that technical stuff that led to the details of why what happened. All they see is, their daughter on the front page of the paper day after day, or having to sit in these grueling inquiries and do her best. So that, I think that took a bit of a toll. Again, they're faithful Christians, my parents, so they definitely knew that God had it all in control in the bigger picture, but that still makes the day-to-day still challenging. Like I said, my husband just kept bringing me toasties and and that sort of thing. And even the kids, they're old enough that there was enough commentary in the school playground and things like that. So I think I hope that they, seeing how I walked through it, helped them grow in their faith. And yeah, obviously my church family, they just were praying and bringing meals and asking me what I needed, and lots of Bible verses and Christian songs. And that was just, I felt very upheld in prayer.
That's wonderful. And what about yourself in terms of how you're working with that? I'd imagine that, I think from what I understand of God is that he's okay when we express how we're feeling. And sometimes that's, what the heck's going on, God? Why the heck did you allow this to happen? Or I don't see you in this part. Did you go through that sort of a process as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel that now, only on reflection, God was preparing me a bit for it before I went through it. So I was already kind of had certain verses at the front of my mind, again, without even really knowing, such as times of trial refine us like fire refines a precious metal from Psalm 66. Or God is always working for our good, or he who began a good work in us will carry it on to completion. During COVID in particular, I just really re-anchored and said, you know what, my identity can't be tethered to things of this world because they will go up and down and everything's uncertain. My identity needs to be tethered to what Jesus has done for me on the cross and the eternal love of God that reflects. And it's funny, that process had already happened in me just before this firestorm kicked off. So it's no coincidence, I think, that those verses were already swirling around in my mind. So it didn't take a lot to, recall them, if you will. And it's interesting because the prayers I was praying, such as, oh, Lord, I pray that I don't lose my job. Lord, I pray this will be over soon. Lord, I pray if I do lose my job, everything will be resolved really quickly and it'll be like this never happened. They're not he didn't answer those prayers in the affirmative. He answered them in a different way. But I only heard Tim Keller say this morning on a podcast when I was listening to a sermon that he gave. Sometimes it's like God saying, when one of his children makes a request through prayer, he actually gives us an answer that's what we would have asked for if we knew everything that he knows. And so maybe, a year on, what I've learned and how I've been strengthened and the conversations I've had with people who aren't yet Christians as a result of this ordeal have actually made it worth it. Like, it sounds bizarre to say, but I wouldn't change it because I've seen so much fruit in my life as a result. So the prayer I prayed that, originally that it wouldn't happen and it wouldn't end terribly, God knew a better answer to the prayer, and I'm never going to see the full result of that till I get to heaven, because we only see the messy underside of the tapestry and he sees the perfect picture. But I'm already realizing that, it's definitely happened for a reason, and there's going to be fruit that's come out of this that, I still don't even appreciate.
I was going to ask you around that. You sort of said, look, there's benefits for it, and the whole program is called Towards Understanding. So what do you think we can learn from your story, each of us, as we try and walk the best life that we have of purpose and the way God made us, whether we're people perhaps of faith or people who aren't of faith? We all want to do the best we can in this world. What are the things that, from your story and this journey, do you think that we can take from it?
I think one thing I've been reflecting on a lot is what peace really means and what peace really means in times of trial. So probably, the world's view might be that peace is, not having bad things happen and an absence of, stressful and negative thoughts and that kind of Zen type peace. Whereas if you read Philippians 4, for example, which talks about, don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything, then you'll experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand, and his peace will guard our hearts and minds as we live in Christ Jesus. And so the peace of God, it's not only something that just kind of exists in our life, out there somewhere, a little bit existential, if you will. It actually guards us. That's actually a military word, in the same way that an army surrounds a city to guard it and protect it. God's peace actually surrounds us and protects us because, he's greater than anything that can happen on this earth, and he has control over everything and the ultimate power and authority, and he's working for our good, and he loves us. So in a sense, no matter what sort of turmoil you're in, or firestorm, or battle, or basically he is our defender, and we can sleep well because we know that he's on our side.
Absolutely love that. Amy, look, it's been wonderful having a conversation with you. The final question I want to come to is, where to for you now? What's the next path for you in terms of the way, there's this, we've even heard it as we've chatted today, this sort of hunger to serve in some way. So I'm imagining it's going to be in some place there. Do you think you know what that is? Is it flourishing right now? Is it something of the future?
Yeah, I think it's sort of unfolding steadily, if you will. And I pray that God will make straight the paths that lead to what he has planned for me. But in the meantime, I'm called to, keep meeting Jesus right where I'm at. So a lot of the last year for me has been really building really great relationships. I'm an evangelist by nature, so getting to actually spend time with people and, find out about their lives and love them really well. Be around for the kids more, do some contracting work in the infrastructure space so that I still, keep that muscle exercise. But I feel like God's probably got another big job for me ahead. I just, in somewhere where there's no way I walked through everything I walked through last year for no reason. So I think that resilience and strength and trust and courage will be put to good use, but I don't quite know what it is yet. So I'm excited but nervous and just waiting to see what happens.
Well, we certainly wish you all the best in whatever that is, and we know that it's going to be of a great value, I'm sure. Amy, it has been wonderful having a chat to you. Thank you for giving so much of your time to just tell us your story, to share with us where it is, and to help us as we head towards understanding of a better way for us to live in life as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.